For more videos on people's struggles, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Hello and welcome to Around the World in 8 Minutes, where we bring you stories of working class struggle from across the globe. Over the last week, people across the world have been watching in real time how the Israeli apartheid regime has intensified its colonial violence and relentless attacks on all forms of Palestinian resistance. The aerial bombing of Gaza has already taken the lives of over 119 people, including 31 children, and injured over 900. This bombing campaign is part of a wave of increased assault of Palestinians and their rights, including the placing of barriers at Damascus Gate and the attempt to expel Palestinian families who have been living in the Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem for generations. The attacks on Palestinians in Jerusalem and Gaza have sparked massive mobilizations across historic Palestine. These protests in the city of Bat Yam, Jaffa, Akka, Haifa, Lid, and Ramle have been attacked by Jewish settlers, and Palestinians in those cities have faced retaliatory violent attacks as well. In the city of Lid, far-right settlers have been accompanied by security forces when carrying out anti-Palestinian violence. In several other places inside 48 Palestine, Jewish settlers have entered Arab residential areas and beat up people and vandalized property. In the West Bank, the mass protests against the attacks on Palestinians in Gaza and Jerusalem have also been met with violence from the Israeli occupation forces. So far, at least 11 Palestinians have been killed and over 500 have been injured. Meanwhile, Palestinians living in Lebanon and Jordan have also been mobilizing, and on Friday, May 14th, hundreds attempted to march back to Palestine, but were stopped by security forces at the border. These attacks by the Zionist occupation come on the eve of the 73rd anniversary of the Nakba, or the catastrophe, commemorated on May 15th. The day honors the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who were forced to flee or were expelled from their homes by the Zionist militias during the establishment of the State of Israel in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. In the days preceding and following May 15, 1948, Israel's militia, primarily the Haganah, attacked several villages and towns in historic Palestine, massacring and forcing hundreds of thousands into exile in what is now known as Plan Dalet. Some estimates say 15,000 were killed and some 800,000 were forced to flee. The Nakba, planned and organized by the founders of Israel, has caused one of the largest and perhaps longest refugee crises in modern human history. The Palestine Partition Plan, created by the UN General Assembly Resolution 181 in 1947, had already given Zionists more than 55% of the land of historic Palestine, despite the fact that 70% of inhabitants were Palestinian Arabs. The British colonial administration knew that this resolution would be rejected by Palestinians. They used this as an excuse to abandon Palestinians and deliver the land to Zionists, as promised in the 1917 Balfour Declaration. The protagonists of this ethnic cleansing were the Zionist militia, the Haganah, widely considered to be a terrorist organization. One of the key leaders was David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel. Many of the future leaders of Israel were also involved in crafting these plans, including Moshe Dayan, Ariel Sharon, and Yitzhak Rabin. All this planning took place before the unilateral declaration of the State of Israel on May 14, 1948. Soon, all these militia groups became part of the Israeli Defense or Occupation Forces, IDF. Israeli militias and the IDF used the war declared by neighboring Arab countries in 1948 to force even more Palestinians out from areas under their control. By the end of 1948, Israel had control over 73% of all the land of historic Palestine, and the Palestinian Arab population had become a minority within these few months. Most of the Palestinians who were forced out of their homes in 1948 stayed in refugee camps in the nearby cities, mostly in West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, controlled by Jordan and Egypt, respectively. A large number of Palestinians also moved to neighboring Lebanon in the north. The tragedy of the Palestinians already uprooted from their homes, however, continued. In 1967, a second wave of killing and displacement happened when Israel occupied the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. Many refugees were forced to go to Jordan and other parts of the Arab world. Palestinian refugees in Lebanon faced yet another massacre by Lebanese militia supported by Israel in Sabra and Shatila in 1982. The Nukbah, far from being a singular process ending in 1948, has continued till today. The attacks this week against Palestinians by the Zionist occupation must be understood in this context. The violence is an attempt to further displace Palestinians from Palestine and usurp more land for the Zionist project. While this violence has been a constant, what has also been constant is the heroic resistance of the Palestinian people, whether it be in Gaza, 48 Palestine, the West Bank, or anywhere the 5.6 million Palestinian refugees are across the globe. Throughout the last 73 years, Palestinians have not stopped fighting and resisting the occupation, and their cause has been embraced by anti-imperialists for decades. From Cuba, Vietnam, to China and Angola, the cause for the liberation of Palestine has been at the heart of all anti-colonial and socialist movements. This week, organizations and movements globally have also taken to the streets to express their continued outrage at Israel's crimes and to stand in solidarity with Palestinians. Despite attempts to put out the sparks of resistance, the hope and determination of the Palestinian people is stronger. As the Declaration on Granting Independence to the Colonial Countries and Peoples of the UN General Assembly states, the collapse of the colonial slavery under the pressure of its national liberation movement is inevitable. It is an irresistible and irreversible process. That is all we have time for today, and keep watching People's Dispatch.